So with long division comes a lot of negative connotations. Number one being is the fact that it is really long in the process. And so here we've broken it down into box division. But first I'm going to show you an example of what the long division looked like for the kids when they do it. First they follow a method of DMSB in the process, which is first they divide, then they multiply, then they subtract, and then they bring down. So in doing this long process, we've got 936 divided by 4. So the first thing we do is 4 into 9, and it goes 2 times, subtract, 1 remainder, bring down. And so in this process, I have to keep on looking down, looking back up, looking down, looking back up. So now I do 4 into 13, and it goes 3 times, and we subtract. We have a remainder of 1, bring down. So now I'm even further down, and now I have to look up again. And so 4 into 16 goes 4 times, subtract. And now we have nothing remainder, but I need to make sure I keep on going down, going back up, going down, going back up. And so this creates a lot of tracking issues with the kids in making sure that they keep track of what digit they're dividing into, where to put the digits in the quotient, whether the quotient is at the end of its answer or not, and they keep on going. So it creates a lot of confusion with the kids. So what we're going to do instead is do what we call box division and simplify it down into a more linear state of problem solving. So here we have 4 going into 936. Now if you see, I have it much more separated. And that's because I'm going to be putting it into a box. And what's going to happen here is I'm going to be dividing into this number and bringing up instead of down. So that's the only thing we're changing. And we're creating this in a more linear fashion, so that way all the numbers start coming up instead of going down in the old fashion. Okay? So now you could have the end of the box here, or you could have it open so that way you can bring numbers up. This, you can actually create larger. So now I start dividing. So 4 goes into 9 2 times. And now I multiply and subtract, do all the same process. 1 remainder. Now instead of bringing down, I'm going to bring up. So what I'm going to do with this 1 is I'm going to bring it up next to the 3. Now notice, that's the reason why I have to have bigger spaces between my digits in 936 when you're dividing. So now I'm dividing into 13, and now you can see, I don't have to look down to see where the 13 is. I can see the 13, and I know I'm dividing into this 13, so my quotient digit is going to go right above that. As opposed to over here, when I'm looking down, I have to remember that I'm still dividing into the 3 up here. And so this keeps you at a linear state, and so that way you don't have tracking issues with your eyes. So now I divide 4 into 13, and it goes 3 times. So now you can see exactly what you're dividing into, as opposed to down here, you can't see what you're dividing into up here, because you're dividing down here and then looking back up. So over here now I actually see it. So now I subtract again, and it keeps everything in line. 1 remainder, and bring up again. Now I'm dividing into 16. Notice everything staying in one straight line. 4 into 16 goes 4 times. Subtract. And you have a remainder of 0. And so now you see exactly what you were dividing into in the entire process. Much more linear, easier to track, less confusion, as opposed to what this looks like is exactly why it's called long division. And this is exactly why it's called box division. Keeps everything in a box. Here we're looking at another example of box division, seeing that it's 1,465 divided by 5, recognizing that it's not limited to a certain amount of digits. We can use larger digits in the division with box division. So when I set this up, I create my regular doghouse, but I need to make sure my digits are separated. And now I can put my entire box in. And then I'm going to separate their place values vertical lines, columns, right by the digit as I bring them up. So now I can see their place values. Okay? And so now as I go into divide, I remember that the very last thing I do is not bring down anymore. Now I'm bringing up. So I start off by dividing 5 into 1, and I recognize that I can't make a group of 5 with only 1 here. So I put a 0 above it, and then I subtract that 0, and I recognize still a remainder of 1, and I bring up into the next place value. So now I'm dividing into 14. So now I do divide 5 into 14, which goes twice. I subtract. I get a remainder of 4, and I bring that 4 up. And so I'm dividing into 46. As you can see, it's very linear, and it's very easy to track all of the numbers. Now I'm dividing 5 into 46, and it goes in 9 times. And so I subtract 45, remainder of 1, bring up. And now I'm dividing into 15. And 5 goes into 15 3 times, and I subtract, get a remainder of 0, and I recognize that my quotient is now 293, and you can see exactly where the digits in the quotient go based on where we were dividing within our dividend. And so our answer becomes 293, and it's much more well organized and linear and easier to track. Here we have another example of box division with 4 digits, but this time we have a double digit divisor. So I'm going to set it up by putting my divisor on the outside, starting my box, and separating my digits. Now finish the box, and then separate the place values. Now I can start dividing. First step, 20 into 6, and it goes 0 times because I can't make a group of 20 with only 6. So I put a 0 above that 6, subtract 0, and then bring up the remainder, and it's 61. So now I'm dividing into 61. So 20 goes into 61 3 times. I subtract, remainder of 1, and I bring that 1 up. Now here's where a lot of kids tend to get stuck, is when they can't make a group because they recognize that they need a group of 20, but they only have 16. And so what do they do here? So a lot of times they tend to just start putting in zeros at the top because they think it's all over, and they get an answer of 300 instead of furthering on. Here is exactly the same thing as here. If I can't make a group with my divisor, then that means I put a 0 above that part of the dividend. And so 20 goes into 16 actually 0 times. So I now subtract 0 from that, and I get 16, and that gets brought up into the last digit of the dividend, and it becomes 160. And so here now I divide 20 into 160, and it goes 8 times, and it has 0 as a remainder. And so my answer, my quotient, comes out to be 308. And so this creates a more organized process. The kids tend to get lost when they get further down, and then they get lost on issues where there's a 0 within the quotient. So you need to make sure that this box division stays linear, and it helps the kids stay more focused, so that way there's less problems with the division process.